You know what really gets my tentacles twisted? Arrogance. Pure, unadulterated, galaxy-sized arrogance. And believe me, as a Vorthak intelligence operative who has been around the galactic block more times than I care to count, I have seen my fair share of pompous beings. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I witnessed at the Nexus Council Summit 3 rotations ago. My name is Zephyr Thane, and I work for the Galactic Intelligence Division. Now, before you start rolling your optical sensors, let me tell you something. This job pays well, the benefits are decent, and I get to travel to exotic locations across the galaxy. The downside, I have to deal with politicians. Lots and lots of politicians. The Nexus Council Summit was supposed to be routine. Another boring gathering where the 5 major galactic powers would sit around a ridiculously expensive table, argue about trade routes, and pretend they actually cared about the smaller species. You know, typical Tuesday stuff. The attendees were the usual suspects: Chancellor Vex Corthane from the Hegemon Empire, Supreme Admiral Luna Starwind from the Federation Alliance, High Inquisitor Drax Soulfire from the Void Covenant, Prime Minister Kai Thunderbolt from the Republic Coalition, and Overlord Titan Void Crusher from the Shadow Dominion. Yeah, those are their actual names. I kid you not. Apparently, when you reach a certain level of galactic importance, you are legally required to have a name that sounds like it came from a bad space opera. The summit was being held on Sanctuary 7, a neutral space station that orbits the dead system of Omega Null. The place is basically a floating diplomatic fortress, complete with the most advanced security systems money can buy. Or so they claimed. Personally, I always thought the whole impenetrable security thing was just marketing fluff. But what do I know? I am just a humble intelligence operative, with trust issues, and a healthy dose of cynicism. What made this summit particularly interesting, however, was the presence of humanity. Yes, those hairless primates from the third rock orbiting Sol had somehow managed to claw their way up from primitive tool users to a spacefaring civilization in record time. The other powers were not exactly thrilled about this development, to put it mildly. Humans had recently established the Terra Coalition, and their representative was some diplomat named Ambassador Maya Chen. Now, here is where things get interesting. The humans, being the paranoid little creatures they are, had insisted on bringing their own security detail. Most species would have brought a couple of ceremonial guards, maybe some fancy ceremonial weapons for show. You know, the usual diplomatic pageantry. But humans, oh no, humans brought Detective Jack Stone. Let me paint you a picture of this specimen. Jack Stone stood roughly 2 meters tall, which is pretty average for a human male, but there was something about his presence that made even seasoned galactic warriors take a step back. He had close-cropped dark hair, steel-gray eyes that seemed to catalog every possible threat in a room, and scars that told stories of violence survived. He wore a simple black suit that probably cost more than my yearly salary, but underneath that civilized veneer, you could sense something primal. The first time I saw him, he was standing behind Ambassador Chen during the opening ceremony, perfectly still, hands clasped behind his back. But his eyes never stopped moving. They swept the room constantly, analyzing, calculating, preparing. It was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. Chancellor Corthane, the pompous fool, actually had the audacity to comment on the human security arrangements during the welcome reception. How quaint, he said, his 4 eyes gleaming with amusement. The humans brought a pet guard. Tell me, Ambassador Chen, does it know any tricks? Oder, the Hudwer, Tiels and know any tricks? The room went dead silent. I swear you could have heard a quantum particle decay. Ambassador Chen maintained her diplomatic smile, but I noticed Jack Stone's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. That should have been our first warning. Detective Stone is highly qualified. Ambassador Chen replied smoothly. I have complete confidence in his abilities. Supreme Admiral Starwind, not to be outdone in the arrogance department, chimed in with her melodic voice. We appreciate the humans' commitment to security, though I must say bringing muscle to a diplomatic gathering seems rather primitive. That was warning number 2. But did anyone listen? Of course not. The summit officially began the next day, and let me tell you, it was about as exciting as watching paint dry in a vacuum. Hours and hours of tedious negotiations about mining rights, trade agreements, and territorial disputes. I spent most of my time monitoring communications traffic and trying not to fall asleep at my surveillance post. Jack Stone, meanwhile, remained at his position behind Ambassador Chen, A silent sentinel who somehow managed to be both invisible and intimidating at the same time. I started keeping an eye on him purely out of professional curiosity. The man was like a coiled spring, ready to unleash destruction at a moment's notice, yet perfectly controlled. It was during the third day of negotiations that things started to go sideways. The topic of discussion had shifted to humanity's rapid expansion into contested space, and the other powers were not happy about it. The gloves were starting to come off, diplomatically speaking. The human expansion rate is unsustainable and threatens established territorial claims, High Inquisitor Soulfire declared, his voice dripping with barely concealed contempt. Perhaps it is time to consider limitations. Translation: they wanted to put humanity in a box and keep them there. Ambassador Chen maintained her composure beautifully. The Terra Coalition has followed all established protocols for system claiming and development. Our expansion has been entirely legal under galactic law. Legal, perhaps. Prime Minister Thunderbolt interjected with a condescending smile. But hardly wise. Humans are newcomers to galactic civilization. You lack the experience to handle such responsibilities. I could see the muscle in Jack Stone's jaw working overtime. The man was a pressure cooker about to blow, but somehow he kept it together. Credit where credit is due. The human had self-control, but then Overlord Voidcrusher had to open his big mouth. Perhaps, he said with a cruel smile, humanity needs guidance, strong guidance, the kind that comes from beings who have been managing galactic affairs for millennia. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Ambassador Chen's diplomatic smile finally cracked, just a little. The Terra Coalition values its independence and sovereignty. We have no interest in guidance. That was when Chancellor Corthane made his fatal mistake. He laughed, not just a chuckle, but a full-throated mocking laugh that echoed through the chamber. Independence, sovereignty. My dear Ambassador, you seem to be under the mistaken impression that humanity has a choice in this matter. The room went silent again, but this time it felt different.
Dangerous.
I noticed that several of the other delegates' security details had shifted their positions subtly. My own combat instincts were screaming warnings. Ambassador Chen stood up slowly, her hands flat on the negotiating table. Are you threatening the Terra Coalition, Chancellor? Threatening? Corthane's 4 eyes gleamed with malicious amusement. My dear, I am simply explaining reality. Humanity will accept guidance from the established powers, or humanity will face the consequences of its stubborn pride. That was the moment everything went to hell. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing the chamber in an eerie red glow. Alarms started blaring, and I could hear the distinctive whine of energy weapons charging up. Through my enhanced optical sensors, I watched as armed figures poured into the chamber from concealed entrances. They moved with military precision, wearing advanced combat armor that I recognized as Hegemon Empire standard issue. Apparently, Chancellor Corthane had decided to move beyond diplomatic threats. Nobody move, one of the attackers shouted, his voice amplified by his helmet's speaker system. This is now under Hegemon control. The other delegates' security details went for their weapons, but they were too slow, too surprised. Within seconds, most of them were down, stunned by energy blasts or restrained by capture nets. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold and my respect for human combat abilities skyrocket simultaneously. Jack Stone moved. I have seen combat before. I have witnessed battles between elite galactic warriors, watched special forces units in action, seen predator species hunt their prey, but I had never ever seen anything like what Jack Stone did in that chamber. The moment the lights went out, he was already in motion. While everyone else was still processing what was happening, he had grabbed Ambassador Chen and rolled them both behind the heavy negotiating table. By the time the emergency lighting came on, he had somehow produced a weapon from somewhere within his suit jacket. It was not some advanced energy weapon or exotic alien technology. It was a simple, primitive projectile weapon. A gun, the kind of thing most civilized species had abandoned centuries ago in favor of more sophisticated armaments. The first attacker who tried to flank their position learned the hard way why humans had not abandoned such primitive weapons. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, a sharp crack that seemed to punch through the air itself. The attacker dropped like a stone, his advanced armor apparently no match for a simple kinetic projectile. Stay down, Stone barked to Ambassador Chen, his voice cutting through the alarm noise like a blade. Then he was moving again, using the table as cover while methodically engaging the attackers. Crack! Another attacker down. Crack! A third one stumbled and fell. The other attackers were starting to panic, their neat military formation dissolving into confused clusters as they tried to locate and neutralize this unexpected threat. Here is the thing about energy weapons. They are very advanced, very sophisticated, and very visible. When you fire one, it lights up the entire room and tells everyone exactly where you are. But Jack Stone's primitive projectile weapon, no energy signature, no light show, just death delivered with mechanical precision. The attackers were wearing sensor equipment designed to detect energy weapon signatures. They were trained to fight opponents using standard galactic military tactics. They were not prepared for a human with a gun and a very bad attitude. Stone moved through the chamber like a ghost, using furniture, architectural features, and even the bodies of fallen attackers as cover. Every shot he fired was precise, economical, deadly. No wasted ammunition, no spray and pray tactics. Just careful, methodical elimination of threats. Deodric souls prayed. Solek solve nephical elimination of threats. I found myself rooting for him, which was professionally inappropriate but personally satisfying. These hegemon thugs had violated every treaty and protocol in the book, and watching them get their tentacles handed to them by a single human was beautiful poetry in motion. But then the reinforcements arrived. The chamber doors burst open and a full squad of hegemon shock troopers poured in, armed with heavy weapons and wearing powered combat armor. These were not the same caliber as the initial attackers. These were elite soldiers, veterans of a dozen galactic conflicts. Jack Stone assessed the new threat in a split second and made a decision that probably saved everyone's lives. He grabbed a fallen attacker's energy rifle, checked the charge, and started laying down suppressing fire while shouting orders. Chen, emergency beacon now. Ambassador Chen, to her credit, did not panic. She activated what I assumed was some kind of distress signal while Stone continued his one-man war against overwhelming odds. The shock troopers were good, really good. They moved with coordinated precision, using overlapping fields of fire and advanced tactics to pin Stone down. But they made one crucial mistake. They underestimated human stubbornness. Stone refused to stay pinned. Every time they thought they had him trapped, he found a new angle of attack, a new piece of cover, a new way to make their lives difficult. He moved with a fluid grace that spoke of extensive training and real combat experience. But numbers were starting to tell. Stone was running low on ammunition and the shock troopers were slowly tightening their net around his position. That was when I heard it. A sound that made my species' ancestral memories scream in terror. It was the sound of something very large and very angry moving through the station's corridors at high speed. The shock troopers heard it too. Their formation wavered as they tried to identify this new threat. Then the chamber's main entrance exploded inward. What came through that entrance was not human. It was also not any species I recognized. And I pride myself on my xenobiology knowledge. It stood roughly 3 meters tall, covered in what looked like organic armor plating, with multiple limbs that ended in very sharp-looking appendages. But here is the kicker. It was wearing a Terra Coalition uniform. Jack Stone. It bellowed in a voice that sounded like grinding metal. Are you intact? Stone's response was pure human pragmatism. Mostly, could use some help here. Reaper. Reaper waded into the shock troopers, like a force of nature. Their advanced weapons barely scratched its armored hide, while its own natural weapons made short work of their protective gear. It was like watching a predator tear through prey, except the predator was apparently allied with humanity. The battle was over in minutes. Between Stone's tactical precision and Reaper's overwhelming physical superiority, the hegemon forces did not stand a chance. As the smoke cleared and the alarms finally stopped wailing, I started to piece together what had actually happened. This had not been a random attack or a diplomatic incident gone wrong. This had been a planned coup with Chancellor Corthan attempting to seize control of the summit and force the other powers into accepting hegemon dominance. The only thing he had not counted on was humanity's security arrangements. Ambassador Chen stood up slowly, brushing debris off her diplomatic attire with remarkable composure. Thank you, Detective Stone. And thank you, Agent Reaper. Agent Reaper? That raised some very interesting questions about human intelligence capabilities. Stone was reloading his primitive weapon with practiced efficiency. Ma'am, are you injured? No thanks to you both. She looked around the chamber, taking in the carnage with clinical assessment. I assume our backup has arrived? As if on cue, the chamber filled with more figures in Terra Coalition uniforms. But these were not diplomats or ceremonial guards. These were soldiers, moving with the same fluid precision I had witnessed from Stone. The other delegates, those who had survived the initial attack, were starting to recover from their shock. They looked around the chamber with expressions ranging from amazement to terror. Supreme Admiral Starwind was the first to find her voice. What? What just happened? Ambassador Chen straightened her jacket and smiled with cold satisfaction.
Pommel. What happened, Admiral?
Is that the Terra Coalition defended itself against an unprovoked attack, as is our right under galactic law. Chancellor Corthan, who had somehow managed to survive the battle by hiding under his chair like the coward he was, struggled to his feet. This is outrageous. You cannot prove that I— Actually, Stone interrupted, tapping a small device attached to his lapel. We recorded everything, every word, every threat, every violation of diplomatic immunity. The whole galaxy is going to know exactly what the Hegemon Empire tried to do here today. The look on Korthak's face was priceless. Pure horror mixed with the dawning realization that his political career was over. But that was when things got really interesting. Agent Reaper moved to the center of the chamber, its massive form dominating the space. When it spoke, its voice carried an authority that made even hardened galactic politicians pay attention. The Terra Coalition extends its gratitude to the surviving delegates for their cooperation during this crisis. However, we must now address the larger implications of today's events. High Inquisitor Soulfire, who had been remarkably quiet during the fighting, finally spoke up. Larger implications. Reaper's head turned toward him with predatory focus. The attack on this diplomatic gathering was not an isolated incident. Our intelligence indicates that it was part of a larger conspiracy involving multiple galactic powers. The silence that followed was deafening. Ambassador Chen stepped forward, her diplomatic mask replaced by something much more dangerous. The Terra Coalition has been monitoring communications and activities that suggest a coordinated effort to contain or eliminate human expansion into galactic space. Today's attack was meant to be the opening move in that effort. Prime Minister Thunderbolt sputtered in outrage. That is absurd. The Republic Coalition would never what? Stone's voice cut through the protest like a knife. Would never conspire to eliminate a rival? Would never use underhanded tactics to maintain your position? Would never threaten innocent civilians to achieve your political goals? The chamber fell silent again. The surviving delegates looked at each other with expressions of growing unease. That was when I realized the horrible truth. The humans had known. They had known about the conspiracy, known about the planned attack, known exactly what was going to happen, and they had let it proceed anyway. Why? Because they wanted to send a message. A very clear, very direct message to the galaxy about what happened to those who threatened humanity. Ambassador Chen confirmed my suspicions with her next words. The Terra Coalition has compiled extensive evidence of the conspiracy against humanity. This evidence will be shared with all legitimate galactic authorities and broadcast across all communication networks. Overlord Voidcrusher, who had managed to remain relatively quiet during the chaos, finally spoke up. You cannot seriously expect the galaxy to believe. We expect nothing, Reaper interrupted, its voice carrying a note of finality. We are simply informing you of what will happen next. The way it said, "What will happen next," sent chills down my spine. There was something in that tone, something that promised consequences beyond mere political embarrassment. Stone holstered his weapon and straightened his tie, a gesture so casually human that it somehow made him more intimidating than any threat could have. The Terra Coalition has decided that the current galactic political structure is no longer adequate for our needs. What does that mean? Supreme Admiral Starwind demanded. Ambassador Chen smiled, and for the first time since I had met her, it was not a diplomatic smile. It was the smile of a predator who had cornered its prey. It means, Admiral, that humanity is withdrawing from all existing treaties, agreements, and diplomatic protocols with the established galactic powers, effective immediately. The implications of that statement hit the surviving delegates like a physical blow. Without human cooperation, entire sectors of galactic trade would collapse, supply lines would be disrupted, military alliances would crumble, but Ambassador Chen was not finished. Furthermore, the Terra Coalition is extending an invitation to all minor species, independent systems, and oppressed populations to join us in establishing a new galactic order, one based on mutual respect, genuine cooperation, and the principle that might does not make right. The silence stretched on for what felt like eternity. Finally, Chancellor Corthane found his voice. "You cannot be serious. You are talking about galactic war." Stone's response was delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. "No, Chancellor. We are talking about galactic justice. There is a difference." Agent Reaper stepped forward, its massive presence filling the chamber with menace. "The Terra Coalition will defend itself and its allies against any aggression, but we will not initiate hostilities against those who choose to respect our sovereignty." The message was clear. Play nice, and humanity would be reasonable neighbors. Try to push them around and face the consequences. As I watched the surviving delegates struggle to process this dramatic shift in galactic politics, I could not help but admire the human strategy. They had allowed their enemies to reveal themselves, gathered evidence of the conspiracy, and then turned the tables completely. But something told me this was just the beginning. The chamber doors opened again, and more Terra Coalition personnel entered. But these were not soldiers or diplomats. They were technicians, carrying equipment I did not recognize. "What is this?" High Inquisitor Soulfire demanded. Ambassador Chen's smile widened. "Evidence collection. We want to make sure we have a complete record of everything that happened here today, for posterity." The technicians got to work with ruthless efficiency, scanning everything, recording everything, documenting every detail of the failed attack and its aftermath. As I watched them work, I realized that the humans had orchestrated something brilliant. They had not just defended themselves, they had created a public relations victory that would resonate across the galaxy. The story would spread how humanity had been threatened by the established powers, how they had been attacked at a diplomatic gathering, and how they had defended themselves with skill and determination. Every minor species, every oppressed population, every being who had ever felt powerless in the face of galactic politics would hear that story and think, maybe there is an alternative. Stone moved to stand beside Ambassador Chen, his eyes still scanning for threats despite the apparent safety. "Ma'am, we should prepare for departure. Intelligence suggests there may be additional hostile forces en route." She nodded. "Agreed. Agent Reaper, please coordinate our withdrawal." As the Terra Coalition personnel prepared to leave, I found myself facing a choice. I could continue working for the Galactic Intelligence Division, serving masters who had just revealed themselves to be part of a conspiracy against an innocent species. Or I could take a chance on something new. The decision was easier than I expected. I approached Ambassador Chen cautiously, my hands visible and unthreatening. "Ambassador, might I have a word?" She turned to me with sharp attention. "You are intelligence operative Thane, are you not?" The fact that she knew my name and position was both impressive and slightly terrifying. "Yes, ma'am. I was wondering, does the Terra Coalition have need for experienced intelligence professionals?" Her smile returned, warmer this time but no less dangerous. "That depends, Operative Thane. Are you prepared to work for an organization that values truth over convenience?" I considered the wreckage around us, the corruption I had witnessed, the casual cruelty of the established powers. "Ma'am, at this point I think truth is exactly what the galaxy needs." And that was how I found myself joining the Terra Coalition just as the galaxy was about to change forever. But that is a story for another time. 3 months later, I was sitting in my new office aboard the Terra Coalition flagship Defiant, sipping something humans call coffee, and wondering how my life had taken such a dramatic turn. The beverage was bitter, acidic, and probably toxic to most galactic species. Naturally, I had developed an addiction to it within the first week of employment. My new job title was Senior Intelligence Analyst for Xenological Affairs, which sounds impressive until you realize it basically means I spend my days explaining to humans why the rest of the galaxy thinks they are completely insane. It is actually quite fulfilling work. The galaxy had indeed changed since the Nexus Council summit, though perhaps not in the way anyone expected. The footage of Detective Jack Stone single-handedly dismantling a squad of hegemon shock troopers had gone viral across every communication network in known space. The image of Agent Reaper tearing through advanced combat armor like tissue paper had become the stuff of legend. But more importantly, Ambassador Maya Chen's final speech had resonated with oppressed populations everywhere. Within weeks of the incident, 17 minor species had formally requested to join the Terra Coalition. Within 2 months that number had grown to 43. Entire star systems were declaring independence from their former overlords and requesting human protection. The established galactic powers were not taking this well, at all. "Thane, came a voice from across the intelligence center. Conference room, now. That would be Director Sarah Martinez, my new boss and quite possibly the most terrifyingly competent human I had ever encountered. She stood roughly 1.7 meters tall, had steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and possessed the kind of tactical mind that made enemy admirals wake up screaming. I grabbed my coffee and hurried to the conference room, where I found the usual suspects gathered around the holographic display table. Director Martinez was there, of course, along with Admiral Rebecca Hayes, the Terra Coalition's fleet commander. Detective Jack Stone stood near the back of the room, looking as calm and dangerous as ever, and looming over everyone else was Agent Reaper, whose real name I had learned was actually Agent Crix of the treachery species. Apparently, humanity had been making friends with some very interesting allies long before they announced themselves on the galactic stage. "Sit down, Thane," Director Martinez said without looking up from the display. "We have a situation." The hologram showed a tactical map of the Kepler sector, where several recently independent systems had requested Terra Coalition protection. Red markers indicated hostile forces, and there were a lot of them. Intelligence reports indicate that the Hegemon Empire, Federation Alliance and Void Covenant have formed a joint task force. Admiral Hayes began, her voice crisp and professional. 300 warships including several dreadnoughts and carrier groups. I felt my stomach drop. 300? That is a significant force. Indeed, Agent Crix rumbled. Our sources suggest they intend to make an example of the Kepler systems, show the galaxy what happens to those who defy the established order. Director Martinez activated additional displays showing ship configurations and tactical analyses. They are calling it Operation Restoration. Their stated goal is to restore legitimate government to rebellious systems and bring criminals to justice. By criminals, they mean us, I assume? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Stone spoke up from his position near the wall. Intelligence intercepts suggest they plan to occupy the Kepler systems, arrest or eliminate local leadership, and establish permanent military governorships. The implications were staggering. If the joint task force succeeded, it would send a clear message to every species considering independence: defy us, and we will crush you utterly. What are our options? I asked, though I suspected I would not like the answer. Admiral Hayes manipulated the display to show Terra Coalition forces in the region. We have 12 ships in the immediate area, with reinforcements at least 2 weeks out. The numbers do not look good. 12 ships against 300, even accounting for human tactical superiority and technological advantages. Those odds were brutal. Director Martinez leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. However, we do have some assets that are not reflected in these numbers. She activated a new display showing what appeared to be civilian merchant vessels scattered throughout the sector. But as I looked closer, I noticed something odd about their configurations. "Are those," I began, "modified cargo haulers, converted passenger liners, and what you might call volunteers?" Stone confirmed. "Turns out a lot of species have been waiting for someone to stand up to the established powers. They are not exactly military vessels, but they are armed and motivated." Agent Crix made a sound that might have been laughter in his species. The Zephyrian Mining Consortium alone has contributed 37 heavily armed mining platforms. Apparently, they have been dealing with piracy for centuries and know how to handle themselves in a fight. This was getting interesting. "How many volunteers are we talking about?" Director Martinez smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "As of this morning, approximately 450 vessels have pledged support. Everything from converted freighters to decommissioned military ships that somehow found their way into private hands. 450 ships, against 300. The numbers suddenly looked much more manageable. But Admiral Hayes looked skeptical. "With respect, Director, these are not trained military units. Most of them have never participated in large-scale fleet actions." "True," Director Martinez acknowledged. "But they have something the Joint Task Force lacks: motivation. They are fighting for their homes, their families, their freedom. That counts for something." The Stone moved to the display controls and highlighted several key systems in the Kepler sector. The Joint Task Force will likely target these primary worlds first. High population, strategic importance, symbolic value. If they can secure these quickly, they can claim victory and force the smaller systems to surrender. I studied the tactical situation, my analytical mind working through possibilities. What if we do not try to match them ship for ship? What if we use asymmetric tactics? All eyes turned to me. "Explain," Director Martinez ordered. I stood and moved to the display, highlighting shipping lanes and strategic choke points. Road. The Joint Task Force is large, but that makes it unwieldy. They will need massive supply lines to maintain that many ships in combat operations. If we can disrupt their logistics while avoiding direct confrontation. Hit and run, Admiral Hayes mused.
Use our smaller, more maneuverable forces to strike their supply convoys while they are committed to planetary assaults.
Exactly. Force them to choose between completing their objectives and protecting their supply lines. And with 400 volunteer ships scattered throughout the sector, Agent Crix's armored head nodded approvingly. We become a swarm instead of a fleet, everywhere and nowhere at once. Director Martinez was already working through the implications. It would require precise coordination and real-time intelligence sharing across dozens of independent command structures. The humans have been working on that problem for months, Stone revealed. Quantum communication networks, AI-assisted tactical coordination, distributed command protocols. We have been preparing for exactly this kind of situation. Of course they had. The more I learned about human strategic planning, the more impressed I became. They had not just been reacting to events, they had been preparing for every possible scenario. There is one more factor to consider, I added, highlighting the political map. Public opinion. The established powers are calling this Operation Restoration, but if we can frame it correctly, Galactic oppression, Director Martinez finished. 3 major powers crushing smaller species for daring to seek independence. The optics are terrible for them. Admiral Hayes agreed, especially if we can document civilian casualties or military overreach. Agent Crix made that laughing sound again. Humans are remarkably good at turning military conflicts into propaganda victories. The plan was starting to take shape. Instead of meeting the Joint Task Force head-on in a traditional fleet engagement, we would wage a different kind of war, hit their supply lines, protect civilian populations, document their excesses, and turn galactic opinion against them. But there was still one crucial element missing. What about command and control? I asked. Someone needs to coordinate this effort, and it cannot be done from a single flagship. The Joint Task Force will target any centralized command structure. Director Martinez smiled again, and this time it was genuinely pleasant. That has been arranged. Agent Crix, if you would. The Treachery agent activated a secure communication channel, and suddenly the conference room filled with holographic figures. Dozens of them, representing species I recognized and several I did not. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted beings, Agent Crix announced formally, I present the Kepler Defense Coalition Command Staff. What followed was the most surreal military briefing I had ever attended. Ship captains from a dozen species, mining platform commanders, converted merchant vessel crews, and even a few pirates who apparently had decided that fighting galactic oppression was more profitable than raiding cargo haulers. The diversity was staggering. I saw Vorthak traders, Selenian explorers, Draconian engineers, even a few representatives from species I thought were extinct, all of them united by a shared determination to resist the established powers. Captain Vex Brightstar of the Zephyrian Mining Consortium spoke first, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived decades in dangerous space. My platforms are armed and ready. We have been fighting pirates and claim jumpers for generations. These military types are just bigger pirates. Commander Talon Swift Wind of the Selenian Free Fleet nodded agreement. My ships are fast and well armed. We can strike supply convoys and be gone before they know what hit them. One by one, the volunteer commanders reported their readiness. Modified cargo haulers equipped with military-grade weapons, passenger liners converted into troop transports, mining vessels loaded with improvised missiles, even a few genuine warships that had somehow ended up in private hands. But the real surprise came from an unexpected source. Terra Coalition Command, came a new voice, distorted by heavy encryption. This is Captain Nova Stormrider, of the Free Captains Alliance. We offer our services in the coming conflict. The Free Captains Alliance, I had heard rumors, whispers of a shadow organization that operated in the dark spaces between systems, pirates, smugglers, mercenaries and rogues who acknowledged no government and followed no law except their own code. Director Martinez raised an eyebrow. Captain Stormrider, I was under the impression the Alliance avoided military conflicts. Normally, yes, the captain replied. In that the established powers have been bad for business. Too many patrol fleets, too many restrictions, too much interference in free trade. We figure helping you might open up new opportunities. Translation: they wanted to see the current galactic order disrupted, and they did not particularly care about the politics involved. But their ships were real, their crews were experienced, and their knowledge of hidden routes and forgotten systems could be invaluable. How many ships? Admiral Hayes asked bluntly. 67 combat vessels, fully crewed and ready for immediate deployment. We specialize in hit-and-run tactics, if that matters. 67 more ships. The numbers kept getting better. Agent Crix began coordinating assignments, organizing the volunteer fleet into operational groups based on capabilities and tactical roles. Mining platforms would provide heavy firepower for defensive operations. Fast merchantmen would handle supply line interdiction. The free captains would conduct deep reconnaissance and special operations. It was beautiful to watch. Dozens of independent command structures somehow coordinating into a coherent military organization. The logistics alone should have been impossible, but somehow the humans had made it work. But then the real test came. Coalition forces, be advised, came an urgent transmission from our long-range scouts. Joint Task Force has entered the Kepler sector. 300-plus vessels in standard battle formation. Estimated time to primary targets: 6 hours. The room fell silent. This was it. The moment when all our planning would meet the reality of actual combat. Director Martinez stood, her voice carrying absolute authority.
All units. This is Coalition Command.
Operation Freedom Dawn is now active. Execute your assigned missions. And remember, we are not just fighting for territory or resources, we are fighting for the right of every species to determine their own destiny. The volunteer commanders acknowledged their orders and signed off one by one, leaving just the core Terra Coalition staff in the conference room. Think it will work? I asked quietly. Stone checked his weapon and secured his gear. It had better, because if it does not, a lot of good beings are gonna die today. Agent Crix was already moving toward the exit. Then we must ensure it works. The galaxy is watching. He was right. This battle would determine more than just the fate of the Kepler sector. It would decide whether the established galactic order would continue unchallenged, or whether a new age of freedom and self-determination was truly possible. As I followed the others toward the bridge, I could not help but reflect on how much my life had changed. 3 months ago, I had been a cynical intelligence operative, working for a corrupt system. Now I was part of something that might actually make a difference. The Bridge of the Defiant was a testament to human engineering excellence. Clean lines, efficient layouts and information displays that somehow managed to present enormous amounts of data without overwhelming the operators. Admiral Hayes took her position in the command chair, while Director Martinez established her intelligence coordination station. Status report, Hayes ordered. All coalition forces are in position, came the reply from the tactical officer. Volunteer fleet units are dispersed throughout the operational area. Joint Task Force is maintaining formation and approaching target systems. On the main display, we could see the enemy fleet advancing like a slow-moving wall of destruction. Dreadnoughts, battle cruisers, carrier groups, and support vessels in perfect military formation. It was an impressive sight and a sobering reminder of what we were up against. But then something unexpected happened. Admiral, the communications officer called out, "We are receiving a priority transmission from the Joint Task Force flagship." Hayes frowned. On screen, the display shifted to show the bridge of a massive hegemon dreadnought. Standing at its center was Fleet Admiral Corzon Drakema, the hegemon empire's most decorated military commander. His 4 eyes gleamed with supreme confidence as he addressed us. "Terra Coalition vessels," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are ordered to stand down immediately and surrender all personnel involved in the illegal rebellion within Kepler sector systems." Admiral Hayes stood calmly, her hands clasped behind her back. "Admiral Drakema, I am Admiral Rebecca Hayes of the Terra Coalition fleet. The beings you refer to as rebels are actually sovereign citizens exercising their legal right to self-determination." Drakema's laugh was harsh and mocking. "Sarah, legal right? Under whose authority? The established galactic powers do not recognize any such right." "Under the authority of natural law," Hayes replied smoothly. "The right of any sentient species to govern themselves as they see fit, free from external oppression." "Philosophical nonsense," Drakema dismissed. "You have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally, or we will begin military operations to restore order. Your 12 ships cannot possibly stand against our combined fleet." Hayes smiled, and it reminded me of Ambassador Chen's predatory expression at the summit.
Admiral, I think you may have miscounted.
She gestured to the tactical officer, who activated a system-wide scanning pulse. Suddenly, the display filled with contact markers as 450 volunteer vessels revealed their positions throughout the sector. The look on Admiral Drakemaw's face was priceless. Pure shock mixed with dawning realization that his intelligence estimates had been catastrophically wrong. "Impossible," he stammered. "Our scouts reported minimal defensive forces." "Your scouts saw what we wanted them to see," Director Martinez interjected from her station. "Welcome to asymmetric warfare, Admiral." Drakemaw recovered his composure quickly. I had to give him credit for that. Numbers mean nothing without training and coordination. Rabble cannot stand against professional military forces. Then I suppose we will find out. Admiral Hayes replied calmly. "You have your orders, Admiral. We have ours. Let us see whose convictions prove stronger." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. "Well," I said finally, "that could have gone worse." Stone actually smiled at that. Could it? Before anyone could answer, alarms started sounding throughout the ship. The Joint Task Force had apparently decided not to wait for their 1-hour deadline. "Multiple enemy formations breaking from main fleet," the tactical officer reported. "They are moving to engage our forward positions." Admiral Hayes settled into her command chair. "All coalition forces. This is Admiral Hayes. The enemy has commenced operations. Execute Plan Whirlwind." Plan Whirlwind. I had helped develop that particular strategy, and I was eager to see how it worked in practice. The idea was simple in concept, but complex in execution. Instead of meeting the enemy in traditional fleet engagements, our forces would operate like a swarm of insects. Strike hard, strike fast, then disappear before the enemy could respond effectively. The first phase involved our fastest ships conducting hit-and-run attacks on the enemy's forward elements, designed to disrupt their formations and force them to commit escort vessels to defensive duties. "First wave is engaging," the tactical officer announced. On the display, I could see dozens of small contacts darting in toward the much larger enemy formations, modified cargo haulers and converted passenger liners, moving at maximum speed toward ships that outgun them by orders of magnitude. It looked like suicide. But then the attacks began, and I realized just how clever human tactical thinking could be. The volunteer ships did not try to engage the enemy capital ships directly. Instead, they targeted support vessels, supply ships, repair tenders, communication relays, and sensor platforms. The ships that made large fleet operations possible but were often lightly defended. Direct hit on enemy supply convoy came a report from Captain Brightstar's mining platform. 3 cargo vessels destroyed. 2 more damaged. Enemy escort group taking heavy casualties, reported Commander Swiftwind. "My ships are withdrawing to secondary positions." The Joint Task Force was trying to respond, but their formations were designed for traditional fleet combat, not swarm tactics. Every time they dispatched ships to chase our raiders, those ships became isolated and vulnerable to coordinated attacks from multiple directions. "Phase 2 is go," Admiral Hayes ordered. Phase 2 involved our heavier units, the mining platforms and converted military vessels. While the enemy was distracted by our hit-and-run attacks, these ships would strike at critical infrastructure and strategic targets. Agent Crix coordinated this phase from his position aboard one of the Thackeray heavy cruisers that had somehow ended up in coalition hands. His species might look like walking nightmares, but they were surprisingly good at tactical coordination. "Enemy communication network is compromised," he reported. "Multiple relay stations destroyed or damaged. Their fleet coordination is degrading." That was the key to our entire strategy. The Joint Task Force was a massive, complex organization that required constant communication and coordination to function effectively. Disrupt that coordination, and even the most powerful fleet became vulnerable. But the enemy was not sitting idle. Admiral Drakemaw had recognized what we were doing and was adapting his tactics accordingly. "Enemy fleet is consolidating," the tactical officer warned. "They are pulling back to protect their support assets." That was exactly what we wanted them to do. Every ship they assigned to defensive duties was a ship that could not be used for offensive operations against the Kepler systems. The Kepler systems. Phase 3, execute, Admiral Hayes commanded. Phase 3 was the most dangerous part of our plan. While the enemy was focused on protecting their fleet assets, we would strike directly at their operational objectives, the planetary systems they intended to occupy. This required precision timing and careful coordination between multiple unit types, fast ships to provide reconnaissance and early warning, heavy units to engage enemy landing forces, and specialized vessels to evacuate civilians if necessary. I watched the tactical display with fascination as our plan unfolded.
Oh,
It was like watching a complex dance, with hundreds of ships moving in carefully choreographed patterns to achieve maximum effect with minimum casualties. The Joint Task Force was trying to maintain their original operational schedule, but our constant attacks were forcing them to detach more and more ships for defensive duties. Their 300-ship advantage was rapidly eroding as they spread their forces thin trying to counter our swarm tactics. But then something unexpected happened. Something that changed the entire character of the battle. Coalition Command, came an urgent transmission from Captain Stormrider of the Free Captains Alliance. We have a problem. Big problem. The display shifted to show a section of space that should have been empty. Instead, it was filled with ships. Lots of ships. Ships that were not part of either fleet. Unknown vessels. This is Admiral Hayes. Identify yourselves immediately. The response came from a source that made my blood run cold. The Eternal Empire. The galaxy's oldest and most reclusive civilization. Beings who had retreated from galactic affairs millennia ago, and had not been seen in living memory. Terra Coalition forces came a voice that seemed to echo with the weight of ages. This is Archon Void Eternal of the Imperial Fleet. We have come to observe this conflict and render judgment upon its outcome. Judgment. The Eternal Empire was known for two things: unimaginable technological superiority, and absolute final judgment of those they deemed unworthy of existence. Archon. Admiral Hayes replied carefully. The Terra Coalition welcomes neutral observers. We trust you will find our cause just. Justice is a concept we will evaluate, the Archon replied. Proceed with your conflict. We will observe and decide. The transmission ended, leaving everyone on the bridge in stunned silence. Well, I said finally, that changes things. Director Martinez was already working through the implications. The Eternal Empire has not intervened in galactic affairs for over 3,000 years. Why now? Stone had moved to the intelligence station and was reviewing our files on the Empire. Maybe they are concerned about the precedent this conflict might set. If we succeed in overthrowing the established order, it could inspire others to challenge authority throughout the galaxy, I finished, including their own subjects. The presence of the Eternal Empire added a new dimension to our conflict. We were not just fighting for the freedom of the Kepler systems anymore. We were potentially fighting for the right of all species to determine their own destiny, with beings who possessed godlike power sitting in judgment of our actions. But there was no turning back now. The battle was already underway and too many beings were counting on us to succeed. All coalition forces, Admiral Hayes announced, be advised that neutral observers have arrived to monitor this engagement. Conduct yourselves with honor, and remember that the galaxy is watching. The battle continued. But now every action carried additional weight. We were not just fighting Admiral Dregma and his joint task force. We were proving to the galaxy's oldest civilization that freedom was worth fighting for. And as I watched our volunteer fleet continue their desperate dance of destruction against overwhelming odds, I realized that we might actually have a chance to win. But victory would require more than tactical brilliance and superior motivation. It would require something that had been in short supply throughout galactic history: hope. Fortunately, humans seem to specialize in that particular commodity.